Brian kind of gave a pretty good introduction of why we need to talk about climate change, why we need to talk about agricultural systems in the future. We are going to talk about can we achieve climate resiliency in the Midwest, and the tagline on that is that yield stability will pay dividends. As we really start looking at this problem, and you'll see lots of different examples as we go through in all of this, is that my major concern and where we're at with our climate is that, and I tell farmers that if you think it's been bad up to now, you might just want to strap on because it's going to be a wild 8-second ride on the bull. Because we're going to face some challenges out there. Here's all my contact information if you want to get a hold of me afterwards and have discussions about this. I have ongoing dialogues from all the different talks I give with different speakers or different members of the audience that say, 2 days from now I think of a question that I really wanted to ask, and so go ahead and ask that from that standpoint. So I'm just going to start you off at the beginning. Here's the real yield trends and variation in the Midwest is that we have variability that's due to within season weather. That weather is becoming more extreme because of the climate that we're going through. The question is how much more will these weather parameters change with our changing climate? That becomes the question. And what do we have for adaptation practices that will offset these impacts? And it really becomes a puzzle of how do we begin to bring this together and say, will genetics take care of it? Will my management practices take care of it? I'm going to have all these combinations that go on in many different perspectives in ways that we haven't thought about before. How do we begin to look at this system from an entirely different perspective? And if you just look at, this is Mitchell County, Iowa, that's very close to the Minnesota border, all that variation in corn production across that, you can see those different dips and lines, and there's 2012 with the latest drought and everything, 93, 98, all those different things. So we see this, here's things for soybeans as well. So, and we can do this for all 666 counties across the Midwest. You see all this variation that's going on, and the question is, what can I do about it? It really becomes the more important question. Instead of saying, well, I will live with this, it really is saying is, no, we shouldn't tolerate this, is how do we begin to think about managing that system so that we can do that. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of this because I've spent a lot of time working on this whole approach of saying, how can we begin to assess what happens in agricultural production? And so we use a concept that we call attainable yields, and that is, and it's statistically fit in there. One of my deep, dark secrets is when I got my PhD, I often went to the dark side, and I have a minor in statistics. And so I learned how to manipulate data with economists. So I really do know how to make data do what you want. And so from that, sorry to offend any economists, but that was one of the most fascinating courses I took, was econometric statistics. And I'm going, really? That's how you guys do those things? And they go, yeah, that's the scary truth behind the curtain. But I've taken this whole approach and begin to look and say, what do we have for attainable yields? And I'll just explain it diagrammatically to you. Attainable yields basically we define as being the yields that are experienced either on a county level or a state level or even a national level, in which years in which weather wasn't a limiting factor. And it's fit through that upper line that's there. And so attainable yields for the U.S. wheat production pretty high, and these are the actual yields. You can put it back this way. This happens to be soybeans in Story County, Iowa, which is where Ames is at. That's the attainable line. And these are all statistically fit. We just turn it in the computer, and the computer searches that out. This dashed line is the yield gap, the difference between the attainable and the actual yield. That's yield we've lost. And we've lost from many different perspectives of saying, how can I get that yield back? How can I begin to manage this system from an entirely different perspective? So what we found is, and this is just corn for Story County as well, is that when you start taking those yield gaps and beginning to look at it from a different perspective, is that we're losing 20% of our yield about 80% of the time. That's what we characterize as short-term stresses. And think about that. If you could take care of 20% of your yield loss, 80% of the time, that's profit. Because those are the years in which short-term stresses are really due to a combination of weather factors. And the primary factor that's in here is rainfall. And that short-term stress is that maybe for that week I needed 2 inches of rainfall. I only got 1 inch. And so it wasn't enough to ever declare a drought, but it's enough to impact you. But that 20% is within our capability to manage. We'll never be able to solve the 2012 drought problem. We'll be able to offset it a little bit. But if you could just take and shift that curve up in terms of production levels across the field, think what the impacts will be. And we did another analysis. This is an analysis that we did across Kentucky, Iowa, and Nebraska. This is county level yields. We selected 40 counties out of Kentucky, we selected 40 counties out of Iowa, and we selected about 30 counties out of Nebraska. This is plotted relative to the National Crop Commodity Productivity Index. Say that 3 times fast. Is that it's an index that NRCS has in its database. And part of the Sergo database, you can pull out the numbers for each of your counties, each of the soils, look at it, and just to put in perspective for you, 0 NCCPI is a parking lot. 1 is a really high quality soil. And so this is kind of a jug graph. The better the soil, the higher the average county yield. But what we see is when we start looking at this, and we didn't plot the error bars around that because it gets really messy, is that there are some counties in Kentucky that actually have recorded 0 yields in some years. They have a complete crop failure. Because they have really poor soils, they have low water holding capacity. That's where that 20% yield loss really gets in there. And then you can ask what's wrong with Nebraska, or what's right with Nebraska. I mean, they're not showing any variation relative to the quality of the soils out there. You have to realize that we did a statistical no-no, is that we only selected counties that were irrigated out of Nebraska. So if you can control the water, the soil doesn't mean anything. But if you're in a rain-fed environment, which most of the Midwest is, soil, water, and precipitation dynamics become everything in terms of the production capacity within that county. And so variation of rainfall, the quality of the soils that you have within that county mean everything in terms of being able to produce yields and all of this. And you look at this, Kentucky has some really poor soils and have low yields compared to Iowa and all these different conditions. And this is corn from that perspective. But if you look across the Midwest, here's the NCCPI on the county average basis. So we took all the soils that were within that county that were farmed. We put their appropriate NCCPI with us. We computed the county average across that. And you see as we go north and west, from Iowa into Minnesota, is that we are going to move into poor quality soils. Nothing against the production that's up here, but the potential for variation among the years is going to be more dramatic because the soils don't have that water holding capacity. They don't have capacity of producing their crops. And as we further push the corn and soybean into North Dakota and South Dakota, we're also moving it into areas that are going to exhibit much more variation from year to year just because the weather's turning. So it really says that, you know, we have some dynamics that are going on, and so the climate resiliency that we talk about is really how do we begin to bring these pieces together in terms of understanding these dynamics. So we've done a lot of different analyses across the Midwest, and this is a really messy graph. But so we've been looking at what causes all this yield variation that's going on, and we spend a lot of data. And we've computed the attainable yields and the yield gaps from 1950 through 2018 for all the counties in the Midwest. This is just Illinois and all the cropping districts. You can see that when the maximum temperature starts increasing above 30 degrees centigrade or about 86 degrees Fahrenheit, is that the yield gaps begin to increase. Minimum temperatures are a little messier, but anything above about 16 degrees, which would be about mid-60s, start showing a decrease. This is precipitation. We start dropping below about 6-7 inches of rainfall in July and August across Illinois as we begin to limit yields. And so we find out that these yield gaps are a combination of all sorts of different things. But the primary things that shows up constantly is July maximum temperatures, because it disrupts pollination, both in corn and soybeans. August minimum temperatures, physiologically, have a dramatic impact on production, because minimum temperatures basically increase the rate of respiration. And July-August precipitation is because we all want to drink, plants want to drink, we all want to be well watered, and when we limit rainfall, we limit that rainfall potential, and we limit the capacity of that plant to store or extract water out of that profile, we see yield reductions. So we see this. I'll explain this minimum temperature with in just a little bit as we go through this. These are 4 counties out of Illinois and Iowa, because you're going to see another graph that follows this that puts this into perspective, is that our July maximum temperature is going to increase, August minimums are going to increase. Precipitation across these particular counties. Precipitation is a very difficult thing to predict with our climate models. We do know that annual precipitation is going to increase. Seasonality of the precipitation is changing. We're moving a lot more of our precipitation into the spring and more variable summers. So that's going to cause us some problems as well, and we'll explain that as we go along. And then we're going to see an increase in intensity of storms. We're getting more of our precipitation within short periods of time. So you got all these different factors that are going on in all this overall process. Just to put it into a different perspective, we went through and we did an analysis looking at 2035, which is really only 5 years from now, and 2075, which is a few more years from now. But you get to look at this, and these are attainable yields, is that by 2075, under our worst projection of where the climate's going to change, is that corn will no longer be profitable in southern Illinois and southern Iowa. That graph scared the corn producers. What do you mean we can't grow corn forever? No, you can't grow corn forever profitably. There's a difference between growing corn and growing corn profitably. You need to understand these differences and pieces of this puzzle. Soybeans are much better off in this. It says that we need to really rethink our cropping systems across the Midwest in light of the changing climate that we have. This brings them the whole point of how serious this could be in terms of looking at this, unless we start making all sorts of different adaptation strategies. This just assumed our standard planning practice, all these different things that are going on at the time. We also ran another little study just to reinforce some of these points out here. We have the capacity of being able to control the environment in our rhizotron. So we have some very sophisticated systems that allow us basically to emulate or simulate any climate that we want, except the Arctic. I can't really freeze in that system as well. But I can take it and make it hot, I can make it humid, I can change sunlight, I can change soil moisture, I can do all these different things. We took and did the simple little experiment where we took normal Ames temperatures in one chamber and normal Ames plus 4 degrees centigrade, which is about 8-9 degrees, which would be the worst case scenarios that we'd have by 2100 in central Iowa. And so we subjected to this, you have to realize that corn really does like it warm during the vegetative stage, doesn't like it so warm during the reproductive stage. Corn actually prefers it to be very cool. Soybeans are much more tolerant to high temperatures during the reproductive stage than is corn, and that's why they do so well in August. You really begin to look physiologically at this. So we ran this little experiment. We didn't change soil water content. We kept it all at near field capacity, so soil water wasn't a limitation. Here's the growth of those plants. The solid circles are the normal temperatures and the open circles are the warm temperatures. That plant under warm environments grew very, very quickly. Grew faster. We see that in this last couple of weeks that we've had with really hot temperatures. Corn in central Iowa has been growing at the rate of 5 leaves a week. We do love it in warm plants when you're in warm plant. So we see this rapid expansion of growth. Saw, and this is a hybrid from the 2000s, this is a hybrid from the 70s, this is a hybrid from the 90s. These numbers right here below are the yields that we got because we take that plant from seed to maturity. We had about 2,100 kilograms per hectare, 13,000 in this, so we had about an 85% yield loss with the high temperatures. During the vegetative stage, we really didn't change the plant size, we had the same number of leaf collars, we didn't change it vegetatively, but we had a major impact on where it was at reproductively. The scary point is that our newer hybrid actually had the worst yield failure. And then this was a hybrid from the 70s, we saw this as well. So I really begin to point out the fact that we need to understand these dynamics physiologically, because one of the things that these plants are exposed to and why those yields were so low, and we see this in years in which we have high minimum temperatures in August, that's why that parameter comes out so high in the yield gap, is that physiologically, we all need to rest. And when we have really warm nighttime temperatures, we don't rest metabolically. How many people grew up without air conditioning? How many people remember real hot nights without air conditioning? John, what were they like? Sticky, uncomfortable. You just couldn't ever rest. And we see that same thing that made you uncomfortable makes that corn plant uncomfortable. In fact, what we see is that in these really hot nights is that we end up with atmospheric concentrations of CO2 within that canopy of 1,000 plus parts per million. And if you back calculate, we've taken every bit of photosynthetic that we accumulated the day before, and we've respired it back at night. It leaves nothing to put into the grain. And what we see in those years that have really hot nighttime temperatures is that we collapse the grain filling period and we reduce the yields. It is as dramatic as anything we get. The unfortunate part is that in the climate change projections, minimum temperatures are changing more than maximum temperatures. So we're going to be going into an environment in which minimum temperatures are going to increase. Our average temperature is going up not because max and mins are going up equally, it's because the minimums are going up. And physiologically, we're going to have great impacts in terms of this. So that becomes a strategy that we have to think about these dynamics. Just to show you that it's not just corn. We've seen the same thing on soybeans. This is the experiment we did on wheat. This is Salina, Kansas temperature. We're doing winter wheat. This is normal temperatures, but we manipulated the soil water regime. If we really had excess water, we reduced yields. We had low water, we reduced yields. But if we had the high temperatures, simulated what would happen at 2100, we had really low yields in wheat. And this is because we couldn't vernalize over the winter. So we see that problem as well. Just to put it in a different perspective for you, what this means is that this is the Iowa corn production. This is the yield gap. And then I took that yield gap and I plotted it back based on $3 corn as to what the economic impact of that yield gap is. Because you look at this and say, well, gee, you only lost, 10 bushels an acre. We lost about 75 bushels on the statewide average there. Realize that that's $3 billion of economic loss. And for you legislators in the room, that's a lot of tax revenue. Okay? Think what that means economically, and if we look across the whole Midwest, and what we lose in this is that we have severe economic losses under our current cultural practices because of the weather variations going on. That's why climate resilience really means economic resilience. And we need to think about it from that perspective. This is soybeans. Did the same thing with soybeans. We did $6 beans, I think, in this case. Go back to this corn. 2012, we had a $3 billion loss, and that's on $3 corn, but corn was actually $7 a bushel. So that economic loss was roughly $7 billion in 2012. So here's the causes of yield loss. In a nutshell, is that we're too hot. We have maximums that destroy pollination on corn. Actually, they disrupt pollination on soybeans. Minimums during grain fill, we see the same thing in corn and soybeans. We actually see it in wheat as well. If it's too cold, we get slow growth in the spring. We actually reduce vigor that way. We see a lot of impacts on that. And then water, we can have too much and too little. Across this spring, we've had too much. We've had a lot of issues in terms of production, only because we have soils that are completely full and those plants are yellow because of lack of air. So we really need oxygen because they're a living system in that. And they slow the nutrient cycle in the early spring. That corn's yellow not because of nitrogen that leaks out, it's because of air and mineralization problem. And then too little causes stress on the plant, reduces yield. So you see all these different things that are going on within this. It just kind of boils it down in a nutshell. Now you can start thinking about, so what do I do to overcome these factors in terms of this? So how can we build climate resilience into this system? It starts with the soil. I've yet to select a hybrid or variety that will overcome climate. So it really is going to take a combination of practices that are out there. Here's just a yield map of a field and everything else, and you think about this dynamic, we can begin to increase the organic matter. So we did a little analysis. If we could change these red areas of the field to green areas, which is the high yielding parts of this, we'd increase the overall yield in that field by 30 bushels the acre. And we didn't even account for what changes in organic matter would be in the yellow areas. So we're doing an analysis right now, actually working with a producer. We've got 18 years of data where we made changes in the system over that 18-year period, and we're doing a statistical analysis on that field every year to look at the changes of patterns. And what we see is that in the first 8 years of that, we doubled the size of the high-yielding parts of that field. You can begin to look at it from an entirely different perspective. I'll come back and talk about economic value as we go. Here's just a picture of Coshocton, Ohio. This is a really rolling area of Ohio. This field had been a conventional till for 28 years. This has been a no-till for 48 years. This is 2012 when they were really drouthy in all of this. And then here's the no-till field on the 30th of July, in which this field had the residue removed. This field was still no-till but had the residue left on the surface because the difference between those was the hot surface temperatures. What we find in the Midwest is that if we have the lack of residue on the surface, is that those soil surface temperatures will get to plus 50 degrees centigrade, which is roughly 130 degrees Fahrenheit. we basically create a lot of heat in that plant that puts that under stress, particularly when it's water limited. And so we see these different dynamics going on. It's another adaptation practice that we're going to have to think about. So, if we want more water, what we have to do is we got to have this increased soil water in there, and that'll protect against that variable rainfall during this grain filling period. 2012, I'll come back to that as an example because that's a drought year. We expect all yields to be low. But in reality, there are producers that had their highest yield they've ever seen in 2012. We have a field that produced 290 bushels in 2012. Good deep soil, lots of water, lots of fertility, rooted down and took water out to the depth of 7 feet. Didn't have a lot left at the end of the season, but I produced 290 bushels. And a $7 corn, that's a problem. So you begin to think about this in terms of how do we manage that soil and store water to take care of the variability, because that variability within the field is primarily caused by the variability of rainfall late in the growing season. And if we have little capacity to hold water, we have a lot of yield variation within that. We need the water. If we increase our soil water, we increase it for plant growth. You have to get that water into the soil for it to be effective. Is that we really need to think about how we manage our soil to be able to infiltrate as much water as possible. I went back and did a calculation on a number of fields, and if we would change our organic matter from 2% to 4%, we can improve our infiltration. That could be worth as much as $75 to $100 per acre. That's not a bad return on making your soils change. And even more in dry years and also in wet years. Because the things that lead you to systems that improve infiltration also improve the gas exchange, which are benefited in these really wet years. So we see that piece going along. Just to put it in this perspective for you, is that here's a soil with low biological activity, and a soil with high biological activity. Is in that low biological activity soil, we may have aggregates at the surface, but those aggregates will be very, very unstable. And so what happens is that as soon as raindrops hit them, they begin to slake, they begin to fall apart, they clog up all those pores. And the unfortunate part across the Midwest is a lot of our soils have infiltration rates that are less than a ½ inch per hour. It's the last time you saw a ½ inch rain per hour. So our rainfalls are becoming more intensity. They're becoming more intense. It's not unusual for us to get 2 inches in an hour or less. We basically compute this in terms of looking at the infiltration rate. If you get a 2 inch per hour rain and you only get a ½ inch infiltration, you got 1.5 inches that's runoff. That's unavailable to the plant. So we've got to get the water in to store it. One of the things we see when we begin to go to more stable aggregates is that that particle remains in shape. We keep that water moving down through that soil. We may leach it out because it gets full, but we prevent the runoff, we prevent all this, and we get it stored within that. So the more fragile the upper layer of soil, the faster the infiltrate rates and stops, the runoff begins. You see all those different things. If you look at it from this perspective, we can look at available water content relative to organic matter in the soil. The better the organic matter, the higher the available water content. But let me explain it this way. This is organic matter content. This is the days of available soil water. I just did a little computation. Again, this is a nickelette soil, silt loam soil. If we have 2% organic matter, this assumes a depth of 5 feet, corn growing during the reproductive stage, so it's maximum water use. If I've got 2% organic matter, I've got about 8 days of available water before that plant undergoes stress. But I got 4% organic matter in that soil, I've got 13 days of available water. I got 5 more days in which that plant isn't stressed. That's 5 more days in which it will operate at a maximum efficiency, putting photosynthetic into that grain, and we see that across fields. An interesting characteristic of Midwestern fields is that they're extremely uniform at the time of tasking on corn. Even no matter what soil is out there, unless it's a year like this in which we've flooded out a lot of spots. But in a normal year, whatever you define as normal, in a normal year, most of our fields are extremely uniform at the time of tasking, or time of full cover on soybeans. The variation within fields begins to occur during the grain filling period. It begins to occur because of this particular factor. One is that the water use of that crop is going up, precipitation is going down across the Midwest, and so we're reliant on what's stored within that soil profile. And so when you run out of water within that soil profile, the crop begins to undergo stress, begins to die. That's where we see the parts of that field that have low organic matter begin to collapse. SNES earlier, and all these different things are going on. Unlike the federal government, you cannot borrow against next year's rainfall. Okay? So you're relying on what you have in the bank. And so our whole emphasis in agriculture is how do you increase the size of that bank relative to soil water, because that becomes your most effective adaptation strategy from the standpoint. What about the temperature changes that are going on? If you got maximum temperatures, I can offset that by adequate soil water. Because what we find is even though we expose those plants to really high temperatures and those rhizotrons, is that their leaf temperatures, their actual functioning temperatures, weren't any different than the normal temperatures. They had transpired enough more water to keep that leaf cool. It's the minimum temperatures that I have a problem with, because I can't offset that with soil water. So I can begin to think about how we change this. So we may have to shift the maturity of that crops to take that plant this earlier season, so it's not being subjected to those high temperatures. At night, we see this in different things. We may have to change crop rotations to avoid high temperature exposure. Go back to my Kentucky example. There are a lot of those counties in Kentucky that have shifted away from corn into wheat, because that wheat's mature before those high temperatures and low rainfall begin to set. So when you think about us shifting this, and so when you think about all of this adaptation strategy, it becomes a different dynamic. But it also says that we need to think differently about our system. And so we built a concept a couple of years ago. We coined it the genetics by environment, by management interaction. And think about it this way. Management is what you oversee, because environment is what you're trying to overcome, because genetics is what you're trying to optimize. You think about it from that perspective, is what sort of management practices do I put in place that begin to allow me to overcome the variation that's going on in my environment, either soil or weather, and the changing climate that's out there, because the genetics is what I really want to optimize. And don't think about genetics just as, well, I'm going to change from one hybrid to another hybrid or one variety. Genetics may be in the larger context of changing species, going away from corn into small grains, or going into a sunflower, going into something that's more drought tolerant. So think about G from a climate resilience point of view as maybe being the larger context of what's out there. So you begin to look at this from a different perspective and all the different. So with that, I'll have the time for some questions. I'm sure there's one or two in all of this. There's my contact information again, so if you didn't, well, you always have it on the handouts. So typically, Michael's good enough to make handouts, so typically most of my audiences don't, so they're scrambling to write down the email. So with that, questions?
Question, precision farming is
Yep.
big on everything. I'm an irrigation engineer, and we have the ability to apply water here or not and everything. Are people working on a model that would look at a field with all its variability and actually say to the farmer, these spots in the field, take them out of agriculture, because we have equipment that can pass through, don't have to put seed in it, fertilizer, water. And now we look at the field from a perspective of total sustainability with economics applied to it. Yeah, is that kind of a system? I mean, we look at the irrigators and the landscape, you think they're all sand, but there's such a pocket of variation that's out in the field. And the hilltops and sometimes even the low spots should not even be farmed.
Yeah, I've often made this statement, gets me in trouble, but I'm gonna retire in January, so, you know. Don't have time to fire me, you know. Is that if we rip out yield monitors and put profit monitors in combines, there'd be a lot different focus on how we're managing that system out there. But go back, because it's a perfect segue. We've been working on this concept of what we call yield by design. And basically, it's exactly what you talked about. How do you take a field, look at the soils that are within that, look at the climate in which it's being grown under, and say, well, are there parts of that field that we could manage, even within the areas that still ought to be field farmed? Do we look at how we change nitrogen management, do we change all this and go to different planting rates? And then parts of that field should not be farmed at all. We'd be far better off in a lot of our parts of Iowa by seeding those potholes to permanent cover grass. Because right now, they're gonna be the biggest weed seed bank. I've had farmers plant their potholes 3 times already. Every time they plant, the corn gets up about this tall, we get the next rain and they're all filled back up again. So, you know, it's a really good waste to seed. So you look at this landscape and saying, are there parts of that landscape that we ought to really think about doing something different with, particularly not farming at all? Because there are also parts of that landscape that end up being the largest contributors to environmental quality because of nutrient runoff, soil runoff, a number of different things that go with that. So you and I have a great conversation about that because we have tons of data. What we really need is to put that data into information that helps us manage fields and landscapes to the best and highest potential. And, you know, so we're working on the concept of how do we begin to use precision agriculture, how do we take and begin to look at remote sensing as part of that puzzle in terms of this, how do we take and analyze these yield maps across years. One of the things that we've done with a colleague in Michigan State is that when we're starting to analyze fields, we're finding out there are parts of that field that are coined high yielding stable zones. There are parts of that field that are low yielding stable zones. No matter what the year is, this is going to be the highest yielding part, the lowest yielding part, and then we've got a big part of that field that's unstable zones. It's depending upon what that weather is. So how do we begin to look at the unstable zones? How do we look at the other 2 zones from an entirely different management practice that goes on? John?
Just curious, would, for preservation of rainfall later in the production season, would deep but narrow tillage be useful, or would it destroy the root system?
How deep, how narrow, and where are you going to put that tillage? You know, you look at this, it depends on when you do that. I've seen a lot more compaction this year because people have been doing things when they're wet that I've never seen in the field before. It all depends on the judicious part of this, but if I can improve that soil and keep a cover on it, a residue cover, I can maintain my infiltration rates and my air exchange rates. We have an experiment underway in which we actually mimic a cover crop, then we go back to a crop, we go back to a cover crop, back to a crop, back to a cover crop. We're running rotations within a controlled chamber. We've already begun to see that when we improve that with a cover crop and a diverse rotation, is that we have twice the CO2 and oxygen exchange out of the soil than we have if we don't have the cover crop. We don't have the diverse rotation. So we see lots of it. You had your question?
Well, I think you just answered my question. What's the impact of cover crops, particularly when it's combined with reduced tillage?
Positive. In fact, you want me to make a more detailed answer than that? No. What we see is that we've been looking long-term at carbon water balances of fields. We have some of the longest records in the world in terms of dynamics. we see as our typical corn soybean system across the Midwest is losing about 1,000 pounds of carbon per acre per year. But I reversed that trend within 1 year by going to reduced tillage in a cover crop. Went to a positive carbon balance. And we changed the water balance as well. So we can do all sorts of things. Yes, sir?
For soil health, is glyphosate or Roundup compatible with soil health, or is that, can you have good soil health and use Roundup or glyphosate to kill weeds? And maybe you can't answer that question, I'm in solar, so I can ask that question.
Actually, I'm gonna broaden the answer a lot. Anything, I mean, even fungicides, some of our herbicides, glyphosate, anything that's impacting that soil is impacting the soil biology. And so, just think about it this way. You got up every morning and, you know, I was your boss, you came into the office and I hit you alongside the head every morning. You know, you wouldn't wanna work after a while. And we do the same thing with our soil biology. It just happens to be a little bit more resilient, comes back, but we're seeing population shifts that are negative in there. I think we're really gonna have to look at how we're managing weed control, how we're managing our herbicides, our fungicides, and all of this. I'll even broaden it out, and even how we manage anhydrous ammonia. Because we're seeing that as a major potential negative impact on soil biology as well. So I think we gotta rethink our farming systems. We're trying to do all these different things, and yet we keep doing a lot of the practices that may be just taking us back to ground zero all the time. Yes, sir?
I was wondering about weed and insect pressures with changing climate.
Oh, we're gonna see lots of changes in weeds and insects. In fact, nothing loves the changing climate more than weeds. We see a lot of this expansive, in fact, a lot of the research that's been done on the changing CO2 regime on weeds is that the 6 invasive species, Canada, thistle, knapweed, some of the other ones, showed a doubling in size from CO2 of 300 to 380 parts per million. Good news is when we went to 720 parts per million, it didn't quite double in size. We have no agronomic crop that ever showed a doubling in size when we went to 300 and 380. So the seed production also went up with that. We just did a study on that, it's published, that we showed the expansion of Palmer amaranth across the Midwest with this changing climate, and it's just going to explode. And we see the same thing with bugs as well. We're going to see more life cycles with our bugs. We're going to see greater densities because we're not going to kill them off during the winter. We're going to see more rapid life cycles. Everything is going to change. It's not just the crop that's out there. Disease impacts, insect impacts, and weed impacts are going to become pressures on us. So our adaptation strategies are going to have to include how we handle the pest dynamics as well. And that is a major piece of this puzzle. And so when Brian talks about interdisciplinary work and transdisciplinary work, is that we're going to have to assemble teams in agriculture that we have never assembled before. And we're going to have them focus towards the problem of saying, how are we going to build resilient systems across the United States, across the Midwest, that allow us to maintain our productivity and make use of the climate and soils that we have, but from a different perspective. And we're going to need entomologists, plant pathologists, weed scientists, agronomists, breeders, all these different things coming together to answer this question. But it's not something that we can wait and say, well, by 2050, we should be tackling this problem. No, this is a 2021 problem. This is a 2020 problem. And so we're going to have to really face up to the fact that we're going to have to really figure out what climate resilience means, what climate variability means for agriculture. But what do we begin to do about this? Not just from a single discipline perspective, because it's not a single discipline. Yes, sir, we're in the back.
I guess, we're working on the 6th generation on our farm, but, you know, I hear all the problems, and if I wasn't in agriculture and listened to this, I hear a lot of problems with farmers, but with everything we're doing and all the problems we can US farmers be producing so much more efficiently than anybody else in the world?
We have the advantage. And if you look at this, I'll go back to that graph, I mean, look at corn production across the US. We've increased at 1.946 bushels per acre per year. I know that took a third decimal. You know, we've done really well in terms of technology. Our agribusiness and our research has allowed the American farmer to be that efficient enterprise. And the American farmer has responded to this because we have had the capacity of being able to take information that comes from, I'll go back to Brian's comment, the land grants, USDA, all this, and put it into farming practices that have gotten adopted on the landscape very, very quickly. And we've made a major effort in getting that information out there. If you look at the rest of the world, the whole information flow between researchers, China does a lot of research, but getting that information into the production system in China is a big gulf. If you look at, I'll use another example, and that's in Argentina. Argentina was having that problem until the Argentinian farmers basically got together and said, we're going to build our own system of how do we develop information and get it implemented on fields. And when they did that, their production began to increase as well, because they took and began to understand the dynamics of it.
Even though you are retiring next year, how much warmer and wetter will it be right here at Morris, Minnesota in 20 years? Because I want Mike Reese to be able to run his wind towers just as strong 20 years from now as he does today.
You won't have any problem with the wind. You won't have much problem with solar. His rainfall will keep all the dust washed off of the collectors. So he'll actually be in pretty good shape. Now those dairy cows that are out here may take a little bit different protection in terms of being exposed to high temperatures, particularly in the temperatures. But all of agriculture, and we haven't talked about the livestock piece of this, so are going to require some adaptive management practices that I think is going to take some imagination with them. One last question.
Your interdisciplinary teams, you didn't mention animal scientists. So where do livestock fit in your resilient cropping system?
Good point. We published a little paper a few years ago, caused a great deal of controversy because we showed that converting the southern two tiers of Iowa would be better off by converting them into cow-calf operations and taking corn and soybeans from both an environmental perspective as well as a greenhouse gas perspective, because they're rolling hills, they have low productivity, putting them back into grass and using animals actually lowered the greenhouse gas footprint. So I think there's a lot of use for animals on the landscape. Going back to the cover crop example, I think one of the things we can use our cover crops for is forage for the livestock and think about how we put that in the system. I think our biggest challenge is going to be in livestock is how do we handle the confined feeding operations where we've got big footprints, massive amounts of manure. How do we effectively utilize that as a nutrient resource back on the landscape? Because I need that manure to improve my soil. But I need to get it distributed in much wider places than it is today. So, you know, you got biogas, you got all this energy that we can produce out of the livestock as well. We're going to have to think differently. The bottom line in agriculture is that we need to start using our innovation and our imagination to take that efficient farmer to the next level. Because all of us will be better off for it. So thank you.